Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flip after Labor Day and you're in class and this is weird and uncomfortable, all right? Well, the big thing about it is let's go ahead and just call what am I saying? There we go. Let's go ahead and call it what it is, right? I'm actually not there. You're currently sitting in there with a sub. I just really hope it's Mr. Wooderson. Please tell me it's Mr. Wooderson. Like, if it's Mr. Wooderson that's in there subbing y'all, please look up and say, hey, Mr. Terry says hello. Now, the big thing about it, though, is, yeah, I'm not there, actually. And where I actually am is I'm on my way back from Italy, okay? So I'm actually heading back from Italy right now. I actually went over Labor Day. It was really exciting. Some of y'all might have saw that I, posted, a little vlog or something like that. You're more than welcome to watch it if you want to. It is not required. I just loved going to Europe, and I love talking about Europe, and I love the history of Europe. And so whenever I go, I like to just share it with my students and stuff like that. But the big thing about it, though, in general, is we're now moving into your next unit. And your next unit is going to be that of ancient Greece, right? And speaking of the next unit, let's talk about your last unit. Your last unit, y'all crushed it. I was so impressed with how y'all did on that test. You absolutely took it, and just beat the ever-loving snot out of it, right? Y'all destroyed that last... Pierre, leave it, bad boy. Sorry, he's trying to eat this stuffed turtle that I like a lot. So anyway, now in general, y'all killed that last test. It was very, very impressive. But we're now moving into our next unit, which is one of my favorite units. We're going to be talking about that of ancient Greece, right? We're talking about ancient Greece in a really, really big way, in a very, very intense way, and we're looking at it in a very historiographical way, right? We're going to talk about all its time periods. Their time periods are going to be more important than those 7 Egyptian time periods, because remember we talked about this when we were talking about ancient Egypt. Egypt is just such a gigantic civilization that's over 3,000 years old, and we had to cover it in 3 days, right? Well, at least for this several thousand-year-old civilization, we get 2 weeks, right? So we get a lot of bit more time to kind of look into that, look into some individuals, look into some different actions, look into some different events, look into some different things that occurred in ancient Greece going forward. But before you can really talk about ancient Greece, you got to talk about a lot of different things. You got to talk about the geography of Greece. You got to talk about how it's going to affect their culture. You got to talk about all these other different things. Well, looking at it, so you also got to know where Greece is, right? So first and foremost, let's go ahead and start off by zooming in a little bit. We definitely know it's not over here, all right, because that's the Americas. So looking at this side of the world, let's go ahead and zoom in again. We know it's actually going to be closer to Europe, right? And who here remembers where Greece is? I know Hnrs knows. That's Hnrs. It's that is correct. Greece is right down here, right? Greece is a very, very intense little area that is a series of different islands. It is full of natural harbors, and its geography is going to be very important when we're actually studying the progression of their history. So let's go ahead and start off by talking about the progression of their history, and then we're going to jump in their geography, okay? So before we go anywhere further, I just want you to know the very first note that you take is going to be kind of outlining chapters in a book, right? When we look at ancient Greece, we always like to talk about the ancient Greek time periods, right? And the big thing about it, as we know, when we were talking about Egypt, there was Archaic, and then Old Kingdom, and then First Intermediate, and then Middle Kingdom, and then Second Intermediate, and then New Kingdom, and then Third Intermediate, and And as we talked about in the ancient Egyptian unit, the Third Intermediate period in 636 BC, and then they're still going to be around all the way up until 33 BC, right? So the big thing about it, though, is that they had a whole different dating system. Well, the Greeks, on the other hand, have an intense dating system as well. It's just not as easy to remember as the ancient Egyptian time period. So when we look at it, we always like to take the 8 Greek time periods, which is going to last from 7,000 BC up until about 33 BC, and we like to kind of just outline it first by understanding their very, very first letters, right? These are going to actually work like chapters in a book, and just so you know, going forward, you're going to need to be able to know all of these, right? So when you're looking at them, you got to understand that it's going to be that. I'll explain the bacon, all right? I'll explain the bacon when we get back very first day. Somebody tell me that Mr. Terry has a mnemonic device, all right? Caitlin, I'm trusting you to remind me that Mr. Terry has a way to remember these time periods in order, and it has to do with bacon, all right? Everybody loves bacon. Anya's probably sitting back there I don't like bacon. Calm down. So, looking at it in general, though, you've got several different time periods, 8 different time periods, starting off with the Neolithic period, then going early Bronze, and then Minoan, Mycenaean, Dark Ages, Archaic, Classical, Hellenistic, right? Now, the interesting thing about these different time periods when you're looking at them, that you have to understand that y'all already probably can guess a couple of different things. Leave your mom's level 11. Sorry, my dogs are just being so bad right now. So the big thing about it, they're not in Italy with me. They're just being little turds, all right? They're just being the cutest turds, though. So, looking at the entire thing, hello, Pierre. So looking at this entire thing, you already probably know some stuff about, leave the glove alone. Leave it. Thank you. All right, so now look, the big thing about it, though, is you probably know some stuff that's going to go ahead and occur before we even get there, right? You already know what the Neolithic period is going to be about because it's literally called the Neolithic period. So it's going to be about the earliest villages, farming communities, stuff like that that's going on in Greece. We'll talk about it again a little bit. Now, you also probably know that the early bronze is going to be when the Greeks start using bronze, right? Now, the big ones that you start to get to that you might not know doodly squat about is like the Minoan period, because you don't know who they are, the Mycenaean period, you don't know what a Dark Age is. But interestingly enough, you might know some stuff about like some of these other 3 time periods, right? There are 3 of them on there that you actually probably know a little bit about, you just don't realize it. And that's the Archaic period, the Classical period, and the Hellenistic period. Those time periods are going to give us a lot of different lasting impacts. For example, like this one.
I'm afraid you may be too close to the situation to realize.
What are you doing? Get your sword!
Sword! Right. Rule number 15. A hero is only as good as his weapon.
I know, it's my favorite Disney movie, right? The big thing about it that I get into right there is from the Archaic period forward, you're going to start seeing the growth of Greek mythology, right? That's going to happen during the Archaic period. We're going to talk about Athens and Sparta, and then we're going to talk about Alexander the Great to wrap up the Hellenistic period. But as you can tell, there's way more to Greece than just the mythology components, right? There's way more to it than just those simple little elements that you might have learned of when you were in grade school and stuff. But getting into it a little bit further, you have to understand as well that geography of ancient Greece, or the geography of Greece period, is going to play dramatically into the growth of their culture, okay? So ancient, or like not ancient Greek geography, but geography of Greece is very important when you're discussing all of these different items and all of these different stuff. Isn't that right, buddy? So like getting into it, don't bite me. So look at this topographical map right here, right? So a topographical map is meant to measure elevation, right? This is not actually the map of like a storm or anything. I know that's what it looks like in general. Stop trying to bite me. It's not very nice. So like looking at the entire... That's mean. Looking at this entire thing, you have to understand, this map actually measures elevation, PP. All right? Okay, Pierre? It measures elevation. And so looking at the entire thing, as you can tell, Greece is covered in mountainous, right? It's an extremely mountainous country that has a very, very rugged terrain. It makes, stop. It makes actually, discovering anything or communicating through some of these early settlements very, very difficult, right? So when we're looking at ancient Greece, between its mountains and its islands and its seas and all that stuff, you're biting too hard. Be nice. All right, so now between all these different things, it's going to lead to a lot of different communities popping up all at once, right? So when we talked about those Greek time periods a second ago, you have to understand the Mycenaeans are a group of people. The Minoans are a group of people. The Athenians are a group of people. The Spartans are a group of people. So obviously, before we even get to ancient Greece, as you can tell, that there was a bunch of different settlements all over Greece, right? A bunch of different settlements that would rise and fall in power. Kind of not unlike Mesopotamia, right? When we talked about Babylon and Acadia and Sumeria and Neo-Babylon and the Assyrians, and I love you so much. When we talked about all those different little places like that existed like that in Greece as well. It wasn't a centralized place like Egypt. It had little settlements all over the place. And all these little settlements are going to have individual cultures that are very, very original to them. So that component is called geographic isolation. Now, because there were multiple city-states all over the place in Greece, geographic isolation is going to lead to them being very unique from one another, right? If you know anything about ancient Greece, like Athens or Sparta, Athens was all about their democracy and Sparta was all about war. So when we talk about that, yes, they might have spoke the same language and they wouldn't have even called themselves Greek. They would have called themselves either Athenian or a Spartan, or not a Spartan, either Athenian or Spartan. So looking at that entire understanding, but their cultures are dramatically different. So that is mostly due to geographic isolation. Those mountains got in the way and prevented them from actually talking to each other when their cultures were being founded. Same thing with the Mycenaeans and the Minoans. The sea got in the way. So geographic isolation is going to keep the earliest settlements apart from each other, and it's going to make their cultures very unique from one another. Isn't that right, Pupcake? So the big thing also that you have to understand about ancient Greece when you're getting into it is that of their terrible farmland. That's right. Greece's farmland is hot garbage, all right? Only about 20% of Greece is farmable, right? So, that's not very much, right? It's not very much, and it's also kind of one of these weird situations where it's when we talked about Egypt, when we talked about Mesopotamia and Sumeria and Assyria and all these other places, they based most of their civilizations off freshwater, right? River valley civilizations and stuff like that. The Nile, the Tigris, the Euphrates, and all these other places, right? Only one group of people that we even talked about this entire time. You gotta just put your face on my face? Is that what we're doing right now? I love you too. So, like, the big thing about it, though, in general, is that when we talked about the Phoenicians, they were the only ones that were really, like, seafaring people, right? By the way, they're going to trade with the ancient Greeks, and they're going to teach them a lot of stuff, like an alphabet, for example. Like, going into it, though, that terrible farmland is going to make, also the fact that they're bordered by seas on either side, the Ionian and the Aegean, this one being the Aegean, this one being the Ionian. I guarantee you right now that Haley Ruther is actually considering drawing that map of Greece right there and then labeling the Ionian and the Aegean Sea. I can just see it in my mind. Like, so, like, going into it, though, and they have islands all over the place, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, if they have terrible farmland and they've got islands all over the place and they have natural harbors everywhere, go ahead and write that down. Natural harbors, all right? You want to get down? So natural harbors, like, all over the place. That means that they're probably going to be much more dependent on trade than they are on agriculture, okay? And also, the other thing about it, too, is that there's only like a handful of things that will even grow really, really well in ancient Greece, and those things include grains, grapes, and olives, all right? Grains, what we mean by that is like cereals or like, you know what I mean? Like, not like there was like, you know, like tricks or like, you know, Lucky Charms growing on a tree or anything like that, Pierre, okay? I know you love Cinnamon Toast Crunch. So now, getting into it, though, grains, what I mean by cereals is like wheat and barley would actually grow pretty well there, even though they're not originally from, it's okay, I'm okay. So, like, now, the big thing about it is they're not originally from ancient Greece. They actually discovered those from trading with the Mesopotamians. But getting into it, grains would grow really well there, and then grapes would grow really well there, and then the ancient Greeks would turn the grapes into wine, and then olives would grow really well in ancient Greece as well. Actually, they grow so, ow, that's not nice. Be nice. So, like, going into it, though, olives were such a very, very important thing that literally olives grow so well in ancient Greece that that thing right there is a 2,000-year-old olive tree that still produces olives, and it's still growing in Greece. That's crazy that that olive tree was like literally planted like when Christ was still alive, that it's still growing. Hey, be nice to your sister. Hey. No, that's not nice. And so, like, literally, like, that's one of the only things that grow. So the early Greeks are going to be much more dependent on trade than they are on anything else. And diving headfirst into all these time periods, now we got to start moving our way through those chapters, right? So we know a little bit about Greece's geography. We know it's surrounded by oceans and islands. We know it's very, very mountainous. We know that geographic isolation is going to lead to the earliest settlements in Greece being different from each other culturally speaking and stuff like that. And you'll see that a lot. Make sure you just kind of highlight geographic isolation. It's going to be very, very important when we actually continue talking about these people. Make sure that you know what it means. Please highlight it, circle it, star it, highlight it, circle it, star it, then make it look like it's exploding, and then draw like a frog next to it. Now, the big thing about it in general, I like frogs. Ow! That really hurt, man. Ow, you didn't mean to do that. That would. All right, so like now, so the big thing about it in general, though, he plays really rough. He's a little baby. So like the big thing about it though in general is we're now diving headfirst into like the time periods, right? So the very first one we're going to talk about is Neolithic Greece, right? So Neolithic Greece is the really, really simple one. It just means it's like the earliest signs of civilization, right? So now what we're doing, Olivia, just to make sure that we know what's going on, Sydney, so we make sure what's going on. We're now moving through these different time periods, right? So now we talked about Greece's geography. We're coming over to the time periods. Neolithic Greece, the first time period, lasts from about 7,000 BC to 3,200 BC, and it's going to be the earliest signs of farming, the earliest signs of pottery, religion, some of the earliest signs of very simple activity that's going on in ancient Greece, right? And as we can tell by looking at these different items, it's really, really funny when you're anthropologically studying an ancient civilization, because you actually are supposed to go look at their trash all the time, which is really, really interesting. Just gotta look at their trash all the time because literally when they throw things away, like they actually, it's all collected in one area. And so by looking at a lot of different like trash heaps and stuff like that from Neolithic Greek settlements, we discovered tons and tons of shards of simple pottery. And then we also discovered pottery that kept getting more and more advanced as time goes on. We also discovered what we think are like small religious relics, like little like sculptures of like little gods or something like that, and the earliest forms of religion that were showing up, right? So we're seeing settlements during the Neolithic Greek period. And that's really it. Now, the next thing that we're moving into, though, is the early Bronze period, right? Some of you are like, man, we talked about the Neolithic period real fast. Yeah, it's just like farming and stuff. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like the simple things going on. Now, the early Bronze period is going to be really, really important because it's going to be the very first use of what? Bronze. Yeah, like, so, like, that wasn't very hard, was it? Now, I know that we talked about bronze a little bit as well when we talked about the Hyksos and stuff like that, moving into, like, the Nile Delta. But in the 3200 era of BC up until about 2000 BC, this is going to be a very defining moment for the Greeks. They're going to start, like wielding and forging bronze, okay? Well, the big thing about it is like, when we're talking about that, what is bronze? And what would they use it for, right? Well, bronze, what it is, PP. So, like, this is Miss your PP. So, like, what bronze is, it's an alloy metal, right? And it's a mixture of two other things, copper and tin, right? You mix copper and tin together and you can make bronze. Now this bronze, or this alloy, is very forgeable. It's very, very easy to make into things. And early Greeks during the early Bronze period would make art out of it, as well as they would sometimes make weaponry out of it as well. It can hold an edge pretty well, but there is one kind of like metal that is actually much better than it, and that is of iron, okay? So going forward, though, the early Bronze period, very simple as well. It's made out of copper and tin. It's also why bronze turns green, right? Bronze turns green, PP, because actually, like the Statue of Liberty is a good example of turning green, because when copper oxidizes, it turns green, okay? Whereas iron turns brown when it oxidizes, and we call that stuff rust, right? So the thing about it is, though, is like if you ever see like copper oxidizing, it ends up turning green, right? Which I used to have another dog named Copper at one point, and he was way more chill than you were. So getting into it, though, as well, the early Bronze period is just symbols or signs that they're actually beginning to wield and make bronze. Are you really just taking up the entire camera right now? You just kind of sit like right there? Okay, I hope y'all are getting a kick out of this flip because he's like absolutely loving life right now. The next people that we're moving into, though, is we're moving into the earliest signs of major civilization in ancient Greece. We're moving into the Minoans, right? So let's get serious, right? We're going to be talking about the Minoans now, and we're going to be talking about the very, very first like large-scale civilization that's going down in ancient Greece, okay? And it's going to be found in a very specific place. So let's go ahead and dive headfirst into it, all right? So the big thing about it is, on a scale of 1 to 10, I always like to ask this whenever I talk about the Minoans, on a scale of 1 to 10, before we get started, Pierre, be nice to your sister, quick. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you think that we know about the Minoan people? I'll wait. I hear a couple good guesses, right? Like I hear, who do I hear like yelling? I hear Lindsay and Layla being like a 3, a 4, right? You're being kind of nice. We know like it's like a 2, right? Like, so we don't know a ton of stuff specifically about the Minoans, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that they've only recently been discovered. In 1907, this dude literally showed up and like just discovered the Minoan people out of nowhere, right? And his name was Sir Arthur Evans, right? He's actually a British archaeologist, an anthropologist that discovered the Minoan settlement and stuff like that, and he is going to begin to just like actually unearth it and create a very, very important archaeological site on a very important island in ancient Greece, right? So where did Sir Arthur Evans discover this stuff? Go ahead and write his name down. Sir Arthur Evans, the dude that discovered the Minoan people in 1907. It's absolutely bananas to even think about that, right? The fact that literally when we like up until 100 years ago, we thought that the Mycenaeans were like the earliest form of like major culture, and this guy discovered something completely new, right? Well, where were they? Where did he discover this stuff? Well, he discovered it on this place known as the Isle of Crete, right? So go ahead and jot that down. Crete, C-R-E-T-E. The Isle of Crete, which was the home of the Minoan people, is down here in the bottom part of the Aegean Sea where the Ionian Sea meets it on this edge. So getting into the whole thing, Pierre, hey, you two, quit it. They are being so bad right now. So bad. Give me a second. I'm going to take a break. I got to feed these two little minions. Hold up one second. Sorry about that. They were just like going bananas, so I had to get them fed real fast. So anyway, we left off talking about Sir Arthur Evans. He discovers the Minoans area on the Isle of Crete, right? And so what he actually discovers when him and a small team of archaeologists went with some shovels and some brushes and started digging around on this island, they discovered a massive palace complex that we now refer to as the Palace of Knossos, right? Like, look at this giant area of archaeological discovery that Sir Arthur Evans and his team actually discovered. And it's a thousands-of-year-old civilization, thousands of years old, that we believe started in 2000 BC. That's right, when you really think about it, the Minoans were 2,000 years removed from Christ and his entire life, right? So going into it, though, the Palace of Knossos is what Sir Arthur Evans and his team actually discovered. And the Palace of Knossos gives us so much understanding of like the idea that actually the Minoans were a very sophisticated culture that were growing out of this entire area of Crete. Now, the thing about it is that some of you are like, well, I thought you just said that we don't know that much about them. Well, we named it the Palace of Knossos because a lot of it has to do with like an ancient Greek myth and stuff like that, okay? Well, getting into it, though, we don't know a lot about what, like, them, but we do know that they are the foundations of what we call like Greek by civilization, okay? They're going to develop a lot of really, really intense things. Like you can see some of the architectural things that the Greeks are going to use are going to be mirrored in the Minoans. Some of these different ideas of maybe possibly the use of like marketplace style like economics with like an agora or a setup of like actually bringing your wares for sale is going to be a big Greek thing going forward. So we believe that the Minoans are going to be the very first first like cultural foundings of ancient Greece, and they're much older than the Mycenaeans that are going to come after them. This is what we believe that the Palace of Knossos actually looked like when it was fully constructed, right? Very, very large palace complex that could have been used for a multitude of different reasons. But diving headfirst into it even further, the Minoans are a really important group of people, and a lot of it has to do with their name as well. They had like several sites. After Sir Arthur Evans and his team discovered the Palace of Knossos, which was located right here on the northern sector of the island, they start looking around the rest of the island for other Minoan settlements, and they discovered a couple of other ones like Malaya and Zakros, and Phaistos becomes a very important one later on as well, because they were the locations of other palace sites. Now, they also begin to start digging around in ancient Crete and find a lot of household areas, like evidence that, hey, like stop eating your sister's food. Sorry about that. I had a little food bandit over there trying to steal his sister's food, all right? Bad boy. That's why he's in the crate. Now, like, getting into it, though, in general, is that the Minoans are going to be a very, very large-scale civilization, and Arthur Evans and his team are going to discover even more stuff. But going forward, where does that name come from? Do we have any understanding of why are they called the Minoans? Why did Sir Arthur Evans name them the Minoans? Well, they're named after a figure from ancient Greek mythology, right? And that guy is named King Minos, right? And King Minos, we believe, is a figure that apparently, according to Greek mythology, ruled from a very, very large palace known as the Palace of Knossos, right? And so in the myth, the big thing about it is Arthur Evans is like, well, maybe there's a chance that the Athenians and the Spartans in this myth that they told all the time is actually about people that they knew were really around, right? And the Palace of Knossos, according to the myth, is where King Minos lived. So that's why Sir Arthur Evans named them the Minoans, because it was named after King Minos, right? And King Minos is a very, very big figure that we'll talk about even when we get to the Renaissance and stuff like that, because apparently he was written into a bunch of really big stories, but apparently he was this really, really rich and militaristic and dominant king that ruled over this giant palace in this whole area. But the interesting thing about it as well is that he apparently lived inside of a big, large complex that was shaped a lot in a very specific way, right? Now, the thing about it is, we do know from looking around the Palace of Knossos that they're a very, very, very intelligent civilization. The Minoans were not dumb. They were actually very, very smart. And we can see this in different items in different areas. Like, for example, in this room right here, which we believe may be either a throne room or a religious room, because it seems that there's an offering plate right here on the floor. But as you can see, look at the art decorated all over the walls. We'll talk about those actually art forms in this flip here in a couple of minutes, and talk about how the Minoans demonstrated a lot of intelligence, because these art forms have actually lasted for over 1,000 years, right? Now, they've been touched up and restored and things like that, but as you can tell from looking at them, they look like they're a very, very intelligent civilization. And look at the construction of this palace with huge numbers of walls that are made completely out of stone, that are using a simple mortar to actually bind them together and keep the roof up. And it's such a big place and so important, and it shows their intelligence, is they even had plumbing, right? Plumbing's a really, really big deal.
Indoor plumbing, it's gonna be big.
I know, right? Dude, so many Hercules references in this flip, right? The big thing about it in general, though, is plumbing is going to be really, really important to show and demonstrate that the Minoans were super intelligent, mostly due to the fact that literally, for thousands of years, most Western civilizations, when they went to the bathroom, it had to be out in the woods or in a pot, right? So, but the Minoans literally had water that ran underneath the palace that took human waste away and actually sent it to a different area and kept it outside of the palace, which would help reduce disease, and actually demonstrated as well, again, how smart and genius the Minoans really were. And this principal side of the Minoan kingdom, as you can tell from looking at it, has been pretty well preserved, all things considered. Like I said, people, certain parts of it have been rebuilt and stuff like that, and actually re-maintained. But the other big thing too, looking at all this stuff, we really don't even know if it was a palace at all. We think that it actually was, but there's a chance that it also might have been a marketplace, right? It might have been a system of tax collection, right? Maybe, for example, when we talked about the Egyptians and how you paid your taxes in grains, and if they didn't if you didn't pay the right amount, they'd beat you and stuff. There's a big historical community that thinks the Palace of Knossos might have been used actually you brought your taxation or your taxable goods to the king of the Minoans, and you dropped them all off, and that's how they actually collected their taxes. But the key thing about it in general has to do with the way that it's built, right? And it's built in a very maze-like setup, okay? And the fancy word in the very, very fancy word in ancient Greek for that is labyrinth, right? Now, there's this labyrinth-like setup because you can see all the hallways and the closed-off stalls and all these different areas where you could easily get lost. And what that basically means is a maze, okay? Labyrinth means maze. And the other thing about it, too, that we've also discovered as well is this other interesting little artifact is a series of bull artifacts, right? We discovered all kinds of random little things around there that actually represent the animal that Minoans apparently, like, maybe not worshipped, but actually held in very high regard. And that's bulls, right? There's bull horns, like we're here in this, like, monument. There was a very, very famous fresco that was actually done as well, kind of like the ones that we looked at in that earlier room, in that possible offering room or that throne room. This one right here is probably the most well-known surviving fresco in Kenosis. It's known as the bull leaping fresco, right? Which maybe might have been like a religious ceremony, or maybe might have been something to do with a game or something. We're not really positive. But as you can tell, there's literally a guy busting a backflip right here off the back of this bull right there. And then there's another dude up front getting killed and gored by the bull, it looks like. And there's another guy back here just going, I don't know what's going on. So, like, actually, you know, in the real life, like, this is me right here. We don't know who these two teachers are, but this is me busting the really, really awesome back. This is the next pep rally. You're going to see me, like, just doing a backflip off the bull. Now, the big thing about it getting into it, though, is there seem to be bull artifacts all over the place. And that's a big thing, because if there are bull artifacts all over the place, does that mean that the ancient Greeks possibly knew about the Minoans and we didn't even know that they knew about the Minoans when we didn't know? It basically felt like this.
Oh my God. Oh my God, she knows about us. Joey, do they know that we know?
No.
Joey?
They know you know.
Oh, I knew it! They don't know that we know they know we know.
Yeah, I know. It's like that exact same thing from Friends, because there was actually an ancient myth that used to run around that we've known about for way longer than we even knew that the Minoans existed. And it's this very, very famous myth about Theseus and the Minotaur, right? The thing about it is there is a myth from over 1,000 years later that tells us more than the artifacts even necessarily do, and it's why Sir Arthur Evans named them the Minoans. It's because this very famous myth is about this guy named Theseus and how he destroyed the Minotaur, right? And here's a big thing. Word on the street that I've heard from the English teachers is y'all know this myth already, right? The big thing we're going to do is we're going to see how much of this myth you remember when I actually come back on Wednesday, right? Or Wednesday or Thursday or whatever. So the big thing about it going into it, though, is that this myth from over 1,000 years later that includes a Minotaur or a bull man, right? Minotaur, bull, bulls, Minoans. Also relates to the king of the Minoans because King Minos was the the Minotaur's stepfather. And then also the other big thing is that the bull was locked away in a labyrinth. Yeah, so there's a chance that the Greeks that knew, like the Athenians knew about the Minoans, and we didn't even know about the Minoans until like 1907. Which is like a whole thing. But what's the point of a myth? What's the purpose behind a myth? What are they even for, right? Well, myths are a really important thing when it comes to ancient Greek culture because they're a thousands of year old construct about ancient Greek culture that has to do with how myths answered answered questions that Greeks could themselves not answer, right? Ancient Greeks did not understand science. They didn't understand historiography. They didn't understand, like, chemistry. They didn't understand different items, meteorology, weather patterns. So they would create myths to explain those things, right? For example, maybe there's a chance that this myth was written by the Athenians about this really intense civilization that, like, that we now call the Minoans that was on the Isle of Crete that might have scared them and stuff like that. Because Theseus is the hero from Athens, and the Minotaur represents this big, scary, like, Crete civilization that we now call the Minoans, right? And of course, remember, the Minoans, or the Minotaur's dad was like King Minos, right? Which is, again, why we actually believe that there's some kind of really intense relationship there, right? But why don't we know more, right? We're talking about a lot of obscure stuff, and if you've been hearing me talk this entire time, you're probably sitting there like, well, you know, Mr. Terry doesn't really seem like really confident about any of this stuff. Like, we know it's called the Palace of Kenosis because the Palace of Kenosis is in that myth. We know that they call them the Minoans because, like, you know, Sir Arthur Evans discovered it, and it was built like a labyrinth, so, like, called them the Minoans after Minos. We know, like, these little things, but he didn't know what those frescoes were for. He didn't know what that room was for. The only thing that Mr. Terry seems to be really confident about is that plumbing was a thing in Kenosis, and he was really weirdly excited about it, right? Well, when we're looking at it, we don't know as much about the Minoans as we would like because they have only one style of writing, and their writing system was known as Linear A, right? And this is the only major piece of it that we have, and it's known as the Phaistos disc, right? And the Phaistos disc, it literally was found at the Palace of Phaistos on the southern side of the island of Crete, and we have no clue what this thing says, right? And the thing about it is most historians operate in certainties when it comes to writing. We have to see something written, we have to see a written account of things so we can understand these different items better and understand the story and the progression of how things are supposed to flow, right? So the thing about it, looking at it, is this linear A system being undecipherable, we don't know anything about the Minoans for sure because we can't read their writing. And we rely way more on things like myths and their art more than we do their writing system. And so that's going to put us in a kind of precarious situation where we don't really know anything for sure, right? So for example, this right here is a very, very famous piece of art that was actually made in the Minoan period. And it all relates back to that word that I just had on the last slide, frescoes, right? A fresco is a very, very complex form of art that actually completely skips over the Middle Ages. The Minoans did it really, really well, and then it's not even going to come back around until like the 1400s. To give you an idea of a fresco you might have seen before, if you've seen pictures of the Sistine Chapel ceiling, that's a fresco, right? What a fresco is, jot this down, a fresco is wet plaster that would be smeared on top of a wall, and the artist would paint it before it dries, bonding the paint and the plaster together and making it a thing that actually could really, really survive some really, really strenuous environmental elements and the test of time as well. So looking at this one, it looks as though that this one is actually a fresco possibly of Minoan priestesses, right? Wait a minute, female priests in a fresco. What does this tell us? Maybe Minoans had a more higher reserved spot for women in their society. Maybe they allowed women to become priests. Maybe they allowed women in society. Maybe women had more rights in the Minoan kingdom than they did in other places, right? So that's an important thing to kind of consider. Looking at this fresco right here, it looks like there might have been a natural disaster, but it also looks as though that Minoans might have been able to build ships and stuff like that. So this fresco tells us that maybe the Minoans were known for trade. Maybe they were able to get out there on a boat and trade different items. Maybe they traded with the Phoenicians, and that early linear A attempt is one of their earliest attempts at writing. But it seems that they might have been a seafaring people because of certain products they may have had. This is another famous Minoan fresco that demonstrates a woman collecting saffron flowers. And saffron flowers are used to make the most expensive sauce in the world, right? So this woman collecting saffron flowers shows us as well that maybe the Minoans were super into trade. Maybe they weren't militaristic and intense. Maybe they just took over these islands and stuff like that and used them as trade ports and whatever. Well, the thing about it, though, is we do know one other major thing about the Minoans is that we do really lean on that trade idea because we've also found Minoan artifacts all over different parts of ancient Greece, right? This, for example, is one of the very, very famous octopus pots that is actually made by the Minoans, and it ended up in multiple different islands all over the ancient Greek area. And this one is another famous one known as the Vifo cup, right? And the Vifo cup is a gold cup that demonstrates a man tying a bull's leg to a post, and we believe that it's a Minoan gold design cup, right? Well, the thing about it, though, this has much more to do with where it was found. This was not found in Crete. That cup was found on mainland Greece, right? It was found in the mainland area, in this area called Peloponnese, and it was found in an area that was kind of very, very warlike, right? So here's the weird thing about it is no one's really, really sure what happened, though. But all of a sudden, around 1400 BC, the Minoans kind of just fell off, and they kind of disappeared into history and vanished forever, right? And we're not sure if maybe looking back at that last fresco, maybe it was a natural disaster. Maybe there was a volcano eruption or something like that. Or maybe they got taken over, and that's why some of these goods ended up really, really far away, right? We're not positive, but we do know that by right around 1400 BC, control of that entire area is going to pass to these people known as the Mycenaeans, right? And around this time, that group is going to take over, and the Mycenaeans are going to be a much more warlike culture that is going to rise up on mainland Greece. They might have actually taken the Minoans over. We're not really that positive. But a big thing that you need to know, and I hope you've been listening this entire time, because this is real one territory right here. You're a real one good kid if you've been listening this whole time. And just to give you a heads up, we're going to have a quiz on this flip when you get back the next time I see you. Very, very simple quiz, about 10 multiple choice questions. Not going to be that hard, but I'll see y'all soon. Study for that quiz. Y'all got this. Y'all have a good one. Make sure you finish this before our next class, all right? Y'all have, I'll see y'all soon.